consideration of this bill. At the appropriate time, I will again insert in the record an exchange of letters between me and those chairmen regarding this legislation. With that, I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 489 and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
This legislation is completely unnecessary and, if enacted, would actually harm hunting and fishing on our public lands. Today, April 17, 2012, nearly 85% of federal lands are open for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. These activities have always been an essential part of the federal land management, and they always will be. Yes, hunting and shooting are facing ever-increasing pressures from development, from pollution, from habitat destruction. Areas that were once fertile and open hunting grounds are now condominiums or strip malls. The reality is that federal public lands and federal land managers are the last bastion of a hunting tradition many have enjoyed for generations. While so much private property is closed to hunters, the federal lands remain open. But instead of recognizing the value of these lands and the expertise of these dedicated land managers, instead of recognizing the complexity of balancing the competing demands on our public lands, supporters of this bill accuse local land management professionals of opposing hunting and claim that officials here in Washington and we here in the Capitol know best how to manage wildlife thousands and thousands of miles away. The legislation and its supporters are wrong on every count. As part of the analysis of H.R. 4089 by the Congressional Budget Office, CBO found that hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting are allowed on most, and I repeat, most federal lands under current law. The problem this bill claims to solve actually does not exist. What's worse, this bill is not designed to improve the quality of our public lands or public recreation. Rather, it is another in a string of legislative proposals put forth by the majority intended to devalue and degrade our public resources. Since the beginning of this Congress, Republicans have pushed for unlimited oil and gas development on federal lands, even waiving important environmental assessments designed to make sure energy development doesn't destroy wildlife and surrounding communities. Republicans have rejected efforts to put safeguards on offshore drilling to protect important coastal ecosystems. Republicans have sought to sell federal lands on the cheap or just give them away. Republicans have tried to cut off funding for new habitat through the Land and Water Conservation Fund. They support dams and other development in and along wild and scenic rivers. They even push for uranium mining near the Grand Canyon in my beloved state of Arizona. Supporters of this bill will claim to love wildlife, but they attack wildlife habitat every chance they get. At every turn, we have argued that our parks, forests, and monuments are important for recreation, for wildlife, and for water. We have argued against these development proposals because we believe that these lands provide economic benefits to the surrounding communities. For supporters of this legislation to come to this floor and claim they have seen the light, that all of a sudden they realize federal public lands are valuable is not credible. This bill is not intended to save federal lands or to support federal land managers. This bill is designed to wrap them in red tape, place obstacles in their path, and intimidate them by making them seek permission from agency heads in Washington before they can do their jobs. This bill is about scoring political points with outside groups, even if it means harming our precious public resources. Not only is H.R. 49 bad policy, it is an expensive piece of legislation. Again, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, forcing the federal land management agencies to scrap decades of careful planning and then forcing them to redraft all these current plans according to the dictates of politicians here in Washington will ultimately cost $12 million. On a day when the majority has voted to deem the Ryan budget in place, a budget we are told is necessary even though it will devastate our seniors, our students, our families, our environment, the majority is asking the House to vote for $12 million in new spending that is both unnecessary and harmful. Hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting are commonplace on federal lands. The only step this Congress could take to endanger these activities is to pass H.R. 4089. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, Madam Chairman. I am very pleased to yield 4 minutes to the author of one of those pieces of legislation, the Chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank Chairman Hastings for yielding, and Subcommittee Chairman Bishop and all the members of the Resource Committee for their support in helping bring this piece of legislation to the floor. I also want to take this time to say thank you to the entire sportsman's community. He has worked very hard to solidify the support here in Congress, including Congressman Benishek, Flake, Young, and Brown, and my counterparts in the Congressional Sportsman's Caucus leadership, Congressman Ross, Latta, and Schuler. And I'd be remiss not to recognize the efforts of the individuals who have diligently worked together with the sportsman's community to help advance this very bipartisan package of legislation. And I agree with my friends on the other side of the aisle that hunting, fishing, and other wildlife-dependent activities have always and should be continued on our public lands. What this legislation does is protect sportsmen's rights. It protects sportsmen's rights that preserves our nation's heritage. And among the provisions in this legislation, it prevents the EPA from expanding TSCA to regulate traditional ammunition and fishing tackle. Those in opposition may suggest it is the majority's belief that lead shot, bullets, and other projectiles, propellants, and primers should not be regulated by anyone at all. But as you heard just a moment ago by the chairman of the full committee, that state fish and wildlife agencies are authorized to manage most of the state's fish and wildlife activities, and therefore closely monitor, address any local concerns about lead-based ammunition. Some will also falsely claim that there is significant danger to wildlife populations. With very limited exceptions, there is simply no sound evidence that the use of traditional ammunition is causing harm to wildlife or their populations. Others incorrectly claim that traditional ammunition was a threat to human health. In fact, according to the CDC, there has never been a case where lead poisoning has been traced to wild game meat. Succumbing to the anti-hunting and anti-fishing groups at the expense of the taxpayer and sportsman, it'll be detrimental to the countless manufacturing facilities of sportsmen and recreational industry. It will destroy thousands of jobs and hurt wildlife conservation funding and efforts. It is the very ammunition, the firearms, and the fishing tackle, along with sportsmen and women, that are footing the bill to manage, to protect, and create the habitat for the species that the very anti-hunting and angling interests claim that they are trying to save. That is why the sportsmen's conservation organizations and the state fish and game agencies have united with industry and Second Amendment interests to get behind this piece of legislation. While there is still much work to be done to ensure that sportsmen's rights continue to be protected, H.R. 4089 addresses some of the sportsmen's community's most pressing concerns, and I urge passage of this important piece of legislation. And with that, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona.
I'll continue to reserve our time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Brown, who is a member of the Natural Resources Committee.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of H.R. 4089, the Sportsman's Heritage Act of 2012, a bill that will protect hunting and fishing on public lands and preserve the use of traditional ammunition and fishing tackle. I'm an avid hunter and sportsman. In fact, I'm a life member of Safari Club International, and my life number is 17. I began coming to Washington, D.C. as a volunteer advocate for hunting and fishing rights and for gun owners' rights and responsible conservation. I'm also honored to be a life member of the National Rifle Association. I know the importance of ensuring that our hunters and our anglers' rights are protected, as well as ensuring the sustainability of wildlife. This legislation is a compilation of 4 pro-hunting and fishing and shooting bills offered by my friends Jeff Miller of Florida, Don Young of Arizona, Don Young of Alaska, Jeff Flake of Arizona, and Dr. Dan Benechek from Michigan. I commend all of them for their great work on this issue. I'm also pleased to say that I co-sponsored all of their legislation. Of note, I'd like to personally thank Dr. Benechek for allowing me to amend his portion of this bill, the Recreational Fishing and Hunting and Heritage and Opportunities Act that we marked up in our National Resources Committee. In this Congress, as I've done in the past 2 Congresses, I introduced H.R. 1444, legislation that would require that hunting activities be considered as a land use in all management plans for federal land. My amendment was complementary to Mr. Benechek's legislation, and it is included in this legislation that we're voting on today. Sportsmen devote their time, their money, and their efforts toward ensuring that our nation's fish and wildlife are sustainable for all Americans to enjoy. In return, I urge my colleagues to support the Sportsman's Heritage Act so that future generations can continue to hunt, fish, and enjoy God-given natural resources.
Additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
I urge my colleagues to support the Sportsman's Heritage Act so that future generations can continue to hunt, fish, and enjoy the God-given natural resources that were bestowed upon this country. I yield back, and I thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona wishes to continue reserving.
Continue to reserve. Thank you, ma'am.
Gentleman from Washington.
Madam Chairman, I am very pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Dr. Benechek, who is also a sponsor of one of the pieces of legislation as part of this legislation. 2 minutes.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I come before the House today as a co-sponsor and a strong supporter of the Sportsman's Heritage Act. I thank my good friend Chairman Miller for introducing it. I'm particularly pleased that Title I of the bill contains the Recreational Fishing and Hunting Heritage Opportunities Act, a bill I introduced last September. Madam Speaker, my northern Michigan district is blessed with abundant natural resources, including 3 federal forests. Like many in the 1st District, I've enjoyed hunting and fishing since I was a child. These are memories I have cherished for a lifetime, and I want to ensure that northern Michigan's children and grandchildren will be able to enjoy the same. Today's bipartisan bill is not some sweeping or radical piece of legislation. It simply confirms that sportsmen will be able to access federal lands to enjoy fishing, hunting, and recreational shooting. These pursuits are part of the tradition of American public land use, but regrettably, they are threatened by animal rights and environmental groups that seek to end that tradition. Like many in this House, I believe these traditions are something to be celebrated and protected. Whether it's trout fishing in May, deer hunting in November, or just shooting clays with some friends, every person in this country has a right to enjoy these lands. Mr. Speaker, let us make clear today that hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting on federal lands must be protected. Let us make sure that when our grandchildren pick up their fishing rod or firearm for the first time and head out into America's great outdoors, they have the same rights and privileges that we have always known. Thank you. I invite all my colleagues to visit northern Michigan this summer for some of the best trout fishing in America, or visit this October and November for some grouse and deer hunting. I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just to make sure that the record is clear, and as I mentioned, much of our public land, and CBO mentioned that as well, is open to hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. I think it's important to see how that translates into acreage. BLM lands across this country, 245 million acres are open for those activities. Park Service, 84 million acres, 70% open. BLM land, 95% open. Fish and Wildlife, 150 million acres, 57% open. Forest Service, 193 million acres, 95% open. The real threat to access to our public lands for hunters, anglers, and recreational shooting is the privatization of these very important public resources. Degraded habitat due to lack of funding and development that disrupts habitat and water quality. The majority frequently laments that federal lands dominate the West and are robbing local communities of important resources. They have promoted taking these same lands and giving it to the states, liquidating others, and intensely developing what is left. If that is the pattern of land management that the majority seeks for our public lands, then hunters, anglers, recreational, and people that enjoy our open spaces and public lands will be more endangered by that public policy than but a problem that this bill addresses that attempts to address that doesn't exist. And I yield back and reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, somebody who has worked on this legislation, Mr. Gosar.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the Sportsman's Heritage Act of 2012. I have lived in rural America my entire life, where hunting and fishing and sport shooting are more than just hobbies. They are a way of life. Unfortunately, in Arizona, where the federal government administers nearly 50% of our land, recreation activities are being restricted by ill-advised land management decisions. BLM has shut down nearly 72,000 acres at Agua Fria and is targeting 600,000 more at the Sonoran Desert and the Ironwood Forest National Monuments. The bill we are considering today removes government roadblocks to these activities and guards against new regulations that threaten to block or limit access to hunting and fishing. Our way of life should not be infringed upon because of the prejudices of bureaucrats who do not understand the lifestyles of sportsmen in rural America. I urge my colleagues to protect jobs, economic growth, and the traditional right of American sportsmen to hunt and fish. Vote yes on H.R. 4089, the Sportsman Heritage Act. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Arizona.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Madam Chairman, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Let me touch a bit on an issue that was brought up as to the cost of this legislation, cost that I acknowledge was scored by the Congressional Budget Office. I have to say sometimes we have differences with those agencies. I guess that's understandable. But they suggest that there is a cost associated with this bill. Let me kind of walk through some points of this bill that I hope will point out how can there be a cost associated with it. Because, first of all, this bill does not create a new program. New programs would be associated with costs. This does not create a new program. It does not authorize any new spending. So because it doesn't authorize spending, how can there be a cost associated with it? It does not authorize any new personnel. So if we don't add any new personnel, how could there be a cost associated with it? Further, the bill restricts the ability of federal land managers to oppose restrictions. Now, maybe because well, if they do less, one would say logically, how could there be a cost associated with it? I think what the reason is, and sometimes we point fingers here too much, but I mentioned in my opening statement that the Department of Interior had some problems with this legislation. And maybe they had some problems and said that there would be new activities for people that work for them, and therefore there'd be a cost. Well, let me reiterate. It doesn't create a new program. It does not authorize new spending. It doesn't hire anybody. Under current law, they are required to do what they are required to do. How could that possibly cost more money? But yet, that is what the CBO scored, and there's absolutely nothing we can do because that's what they score. But I'll tell you, Madam Chairman, for the record, I highly doubt that if one were to walk their way through the restrictions that I have here and apply it to any other legislation, I would have to think that there would be no cost associated with that legislation, and I think that is probably the case when we really get down to it on this legislation. With that, I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva.
May I inquire as to how much time is available to?
He's got 23 minutes.
Gentleman from Arizona has 23 minutes remaining, and the gentleman from Washington has 11 and a half.
Continue to reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm very pleased to yield 2 minutes to another gentleman, 3 minutes to another gentleman has authored legislation as part of the title of this legislation. Gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake.
Gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. I rise in support of H.R. 4089. The Sportsman Heritage Act. I've appreciated the opportunity and have helped with the introduction of legislation that will protect and enhance opportunities for recreational hunting, fishing, and shooting. I'm proud that the Recreational Shooting Protection Act, this is legislation that I introduced earlier this year and represents a critical measure toward protecting the rights of recreational shooters, is included in the bill that we're debating today. As I stand here, the Bureau of Land Management is actively working to ban recreational shooting in both the Sonoran Desert and Ironwood Forest National Monuments in Arizona. That's more than 600,000 acres of taxpayer-supported public lands that, if the administration had its druthers, would be closed to recreational shooting in my state alone. 600,000 acres in Arizona alone. Don't be confused, this isn't just an Arizona issue. In 2010 alone, the agency unilaterally closed more than 400,000 acres across 3 states to recreational shooting. And just as troubling as the closures themselves is a process by which they're coming about. The mechanism for these closures, it's just bureaucratic fiat. Too often, the BLM seems quick to point to the actions of some bad actors and just as quick to ignore that many recreational shooting enthusiasts responsibly use their federal lands and the existing laws already on the books that make disreputable actions illegal already. Whether it's closing 1 million acres of federal lands to do mining, investigating costly pollution controls for a new power plant, trying to require costly modifications to pools, or locking up recreational shooting areas, you would think that the administration's aims at some point, the administration's arms, I should say, would get tired of overreaching. As a remedy in the shooting areas, the Recreational Shooting Protection Act portion of the bill would require congressional approval for existing and future recreational shooting restrictions on BLM-managed national monument lands. It would also direct the BLM to manage national monument lands in a manner that enhances recreational shooting opportunities. I should say that that really is the instructions that the agencies are under now, yet they're continuing to carry forward with these actions. For generations, the federal government has recognized recreational shooting as a traditional and legitimate activity on public lands. Nowhere is this more relevant than in western states like Arizona, where communities are often and literally surrounded by federal lands. To be clear, all this provision advocates is an additional layer of supervision and oversight of the process. It does not prevent the closure of BLM lands to recreational shooting. It does not unconditionally reverse existing closures, and it does not grant recreational shooters carte blanche on national monument lands. It also does not authorize any new spending. I believe the Recreational Shooting Protection Act affords Congress the necessary oversight to prevent unnecessary recreational shooting bans, and I urge its adoption. I should mention...
30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. As a diverse package of critical natural resource bills, the Sportsman Heritage Act, it's poised to protect and enhance opportunities for sportsmen across the nation. I urge its passage. And again, I thank the Chairman for bringing this forward and those who've worked on the broader piece of legislation. It's a good piece of legislation. It ought to be passed. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And, my state and my colleague, Congressman Flake's state, and my district are both blessed with federal lands, both Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management areas. The debate over access for shooting has been fierce for many, many years. We've had closures of some areas because shooting activities, in particular using saguaro cactuses as targets, was impacting the lands. And in those areas in which, or the ironwood, in which this is an endangered bosque that is one of the few left in our nation, and certainly in the Southwest. These are processes by which communities go through. An arbitrary cookie-cutter approach at the national level in terms of recreational shooting robs the local community of their ability to impact and their ability to be able to negotiate, compromise, and draw consensus on appropriate shooting ranges and sites. I would suggest that if here in Washington, D.C., whether it's Congress or the officials here in Washington make those decisions for Arizona, for our respective districts, that the reaction from the public will not be a good one insofar as they have been robbed of the opportunity to find a workable solution for all the parties involved. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am very pleased to yield 2 minutes to a Vice Chairman of the Bipartisan Sportsman Caucus, Mr. Latta from Ohio.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman and Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 4089, the Sportsman's Heritage Act of 2012. This important legislation for sportsmen and women protect their rights to hunt and fish while limiting restrictions in regards to these activities. As a lifetime hunter, Ohio hunter education instructor, and current vice chairman of the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, these issues are not only important to me, but to my constituents as well as individuals across this nation. I strongly support H.R. 4089 and will discuss a provision of the bill relating to the importance of having access to public lands for our sportsmen and women. This portion of the bill would ensure that federal land management agencies, primarily the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management, act to protect and foster hunting, fishing, and shooting traditions on federal public lands by directing these federal agencies to exercise their land management discretion to facilitate sportsmen and women's activities. One of my priorities is to ensure that our youth have the opportunities to access and become involved in the hunting, fishing, and other shooting sports. One of the main reasons cited as to why sportsmen and women stop participating in these activities is the limitation in access to land. By having more access to federal lands, it helps current users and facilitates that next generation of hunters, anglers, and shooters. In my home state of Ohio, only 3% of the land is publicly owned, where in some of our western states, the majority of land is publicly owned, as just mentioned by my friend. For example, in Nevada, approximately 80% of the land is federal land, and in Wyoming it's almost 50%. Again, if these lands in these states with large tracts of federal lands are restricted, hunters and recreational fishermen and women will not be able to participate in those outdoor activities. And again, it will impede our youth from being able to participate in the future because, again, they rely on those adults to get them out. I strongly urge my colleagues to support H.R. 4089, and I thank the gentleman, and I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Arizona.
If I may, if I could inquire from the Chairman Hastings as to any more speakers, I'm prepared to close, but...
thank you, the gentleman. I am prepared to close, so if he wishes to close, then I'll close on my side.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you. Dams, derricks, distress sales, that has been the agenda of the majority until today regarding our public lands. Today, an epiphany. We need to protect wildlife habitat, water quality, and access for hunters, fishermen, anglers, and recreational shooting. Promoting more hunting and fishing activities on federal land involves ensuring the habitat is protected, acquiring new lands to expand existing habitat, funding wildlife and habitat management, and continuing to ensure that our parks, forests, monuments, and wildlife areas remain in public hands. So if we're going to have a discussion about access for a very widely and broadly agreed issue of hunting and fishing on our public lands, we should do that, a serious discussion. And I invite the majority to enter into that, a serious discussion about the funding for fish and wildlife and habitat. a serious discussion of land acquisition to increase access and availability for hunters and fishermen, and clean water programs that would assure that habitat is protected. Hunting and fishing are under attack, but they're under attack from privatization and development, not from federal land managers. This bill says that top-down Washington knows the best management, and that is the way to go. We support letting local land managers, local communities do their job. You can't say you trust CBO when you like the score and don't trust CBO when you don't like the score. A vote for this bill is a vote to spend $12 million. It's that simple. A vote for this bill is to continue the philosophy of dams, derricks, and distress sales of our public lands under the guise of solving a problem for hunters and fishermen in this country that does not exist on the public lands. 4 out of 5 acres is available for hunting and fishing on our public lands. I would suggest that that is not just a question of being enough. That is about access and opportunity on our public lands for those activities. Let's not jeopardize them. Vote no on 4089, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield myself the balance of the time.
The gentleman's recognized for up to 6 minutes.
I thank the Chairman. Let's kind of go back and set the stage for why this legislation is needed. And let's understand that public lands were designated for multiple use, which of course means recreation and of course commercial activity, unless Congress says otherwise. And the most obvious example of where Congress says otherwise is in wilderness designations. But even then, in wilderness designations, there are certain activities. But federal lands were designed to be multiple use. The reason for this legislation is because we are finding arbitrary decisions on the ground, not for the exceptions that Congress looked at, that would restrict land activity. The gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake, pointed at very well with his portion of this bill. But some of the restrictions make perfectly good sense if one were to look at it hopefully logically, and sometimes we miss that point when we debate here on the floor. But one of the reasons is for reasons of national security. If there should be restrictions on public lands for national security, nobody, I think, would argue with that. If there should be restrictions on public lands for public health, nobody would argue with that. Firefights, forest fires or wildfires come to mind in that situation. Or if they are contrary to applicable federal statutes. All of those things make sense. But let's not lose the underlying principle of public lands, that they should be for multiple use. And what this legislation simply does is reiterates that hunting and fishing has their portion, not higher, not lower, but has their portion on use for public lands. That's what the whole intent of this legislation is. And where I hear my friends on the other side of the aisle saying this is becoming top-down, and yet when you look at the concerns that members have had trying to offer amendments where they're trying to get more flexibility, you can't have it both ways. This simply reiterates what is the national standards. It should be multiple use, but particularly in this case as it relates to hunting and fishing. With that, I urge adoption of the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
And yields back the balance of his time. All time for general debate has expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources printed in the bill, it shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 112-19. That amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to that amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those printed in House Report 112-444. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report by a member designated in the report, shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 112-444. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report Number 112-444, offered by Mr. Hastings of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 614, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Hastings, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
It's recognized for up to 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, this manager's amendment is a non-controversial amendment to H.R. 40899 that makes several technical, clarifying, and harmonizing changes to the bill. It adds to the bill amendments that were adopted by the Natural Resources Committee when it considered several of the individual bills that are now separate titles of the Sportsman's Heritage Act. In addition, although I believe the original bill never allowed extractive commercial activity or motorized travel in wilderness areas, this amendment adds language that will say so explicitly. Finally, the amendment reduces the administrative tasks faced by the agencies with regard to the format and frequency of public notice and congressional reporting requirements. So I ask for your support for this amendment, and with that I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do not object to this dab of lipstick on 4089 and yield back the remainder of our time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report 112-444. What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at
Clerk
the
will
desk.
designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 2, printed in House Report Number 112-444, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 614, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 4089 deems all federal land open for hunting and recreational shooting unless a closure is made by the head of the agency here in Washington. The authors of the legislation intended to exempt from the bill lands under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. I'm sure I have it on good authority from them, from the authors, that this was their intention. However, as written, the bill only exempts national parks and national monuments. My amendment is a simple technical correction that ensures all units of the National Park Service are included in the exemption. The exemption language in Title I is, I believe, unintentionally broad and not clear. The National Park System includes units that have a variety of designations: national seashores, national scenic trails, national battlefields, among others. The National Park System has units in urban areas, in rural areas, in suburban communities, in the east, in the west, in the center of our country. And without this amendment, H.R. 4089 could potentially open for hunting the Patterson, New Jersey Great Falls National Historic Park in the heart of Patterson, the third largest city in my state. The bill could, as written, potentially allow hunting within Antietam or Manassas national battlefields. All units of the National Park System, like our national battlefield and military parks, are sacred ground, should be reserved for solemn contemplation of the sacrifices of our ancestors. My amendment would ensure that the policies of the National Park Service involving firearms in areas controlled by the National Park Service stay in place. Now, some have suggested that the historic battle reenactments constitute recreational shooting, and my amendment would, they say, prevent reenacting on battlefields. maybe my good friend from Utah doesn't know the National Park Service policy. It's important to note that current National Park Service policy right now prohibits, quote, battle reenactments and demonstrations of battle tactics that involve exchanges of fire between opposing lines or any other form of simulated warfare, end quote. I'm not aware of any problems that this sensible policy has caused. It's important to note that there are National Park System units like Lake Roosevelt National Recreation Area in Washington State, I say to my friend the chairman, or Craters of the Moon National Preserve in Idaho that allow hunting and recreational shooting. My amendment would not affect those policies. The hunting and recreational shooting could continue in those places. I just want to emphasize, this is a technical amendment. I'm not getting at the merits for or against the bill overall, but should this bill proceed, it would be a big mistake to say that the hunting, the recreational shooting could take place in Gettysburg and Chincoteague and any number of other places that aren't intended. Let's ensure that in the hurry to open all federal lands to hunting and recreational shooting, we don't carelessly open up to gunfire consecrated grounds like the Civil War battlefields, like the parks and beaches and forests of our national recreation areas. I urge my colleagues to support this technical correction to the bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
I rise in opposition.
Gentleman's recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Chairman, the Holt Amendment uses a blunderbuss and not a rifle to address the complex issue of programs in national parks that involve shooting. This issue goes beyond sport or subsistence hunting, which are currently allowed in some park units. In addition to the national parks that allow traditional forms of hunting, the National Park Service has a historic weapons program that would be silenced, contrary to what my good friend and the author of this amendment, Mr. Holt, says. In 2011, more than 600 national parks participated in some form of historic weapons demonstrations. From cannons to flintlocks, the Park Service says this program is, and I quote, undeniably popular with visitors, end quote, and drew just less than 1 million visitors to various national parks around the country last year. At Fort Vancouver National Park in Oregon and Washington, for example, both rangers and volunteers regularly fire muskets and cannons to demonstrate the historic role these weapons play in the history of the site. One of the most popular public participation events in many parks involves a reenactment of historic battles. Thousands of reenactors participate. They use their own historically accurate weapons and costumes to recreate on location the great battles that took place at our Civil War sites. For many of those who participate or come to watch, these educational passions are the favorite of the national park events. It was on this week, 237 years ago, that General Thomas Gage of the Royal Governor in Boston sent his troops to confiscate the Patriot weapons at Lexington and Concord. And at the Minuteman National Historic Park today, a living history event is conducted in which volunteers are permitted to bring reproductions of the flintlock muskets, pistols, and percussion cap weapons their ancestors used during the first battle for our independence. At a time when the National Park Service is running a multi-billion-dollar maintenance backlog, the Holt Amendment will disarm it of its real draw. So I urge my colleagues to oppose the amendment and to allow the Park Service to continue the tradition of educating visitors about our proud American history. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I ask the remaining time?
Gentleman has 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Well, my amendment simply ensures that nothing in this act would force hunting in the National Park Service. I really don't understand what the chairman is talking about here, because where it is allowed, it would be allowed. Where it's not allowed, it would not be allowed. It is policy of the National Park Service not to allow reenactment of battles. The battle reenactments and demonstrations of battle tactics that involve exchanges of fire between opposing lines the taking of casualties, hand-to-hand combat, etc., are prohibited in all parks. Park Service employees can conduct demonstrations as part of their living history program. That's done now. It would be continued under this. What this says is, under this legislation, were it to become law, a person who wants to hunt in Gettysburg Park can't do that unless the National Park Service policy allows it. That's all this says. It extends it to all facilities of the National Park Service, not just what was specified in the bill, parks and monuments.
Time has expired.
I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield myself the balance of the time, which is how much?
2.5 minutes.
I yield myself the balance of the time. I beg to differ. I understand where my good friend from New Jersey is coming from. I'm sure that's what his intent, but that's not what his amendment says. His amendment says that that activity has to be provided by statute at each facility, and that's simply not the case. We haven't done that. We blanket authority give that to the National Park System to carry on what is classified as pastimes, that sort of activity. He prohibits that unless it's provided by statute. And he did not offer an amendment to say we should statutize every one of those at every one of the sites. That's the flaw in the amendment. And it was brought up in rules yesterday, and yet the amendment wasn't corrected, and so here we are. Now, I understand what he's trying to do, but the amendment does not say that. So I urge defeat of the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from New Jersey.
On that, I ask a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report 112-444. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 3, printed in House Report Number 112-444, offered by Mr. Grijalva of Arizona.
Pursuant to House Resolution 614, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Grijalva, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of my amendment is to emphasize the point that nearly 85% of all public lands are already open for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. Whether we are talking about Fish and Wildlife Service, Bureau of Land Management, including national monuments, National Park Service lands, or the Forest Service land, in each and every case, the majority are open for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. My amendment would only trigger the provisions in Title I and II of this legislation if less than 75% of federal public lands are open for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. I can't think of any other use that occurs on 75% of our public lands. I understand that some individuals are upset about some specific court decision or specific local closures, but we need to keep things in perspective. Right now, more than 4 out of 5 acres are open for hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. Given that, do we really need federal employees in D.C. making decisions about which lands to close, or worse yet, have Congress make that decision? My state and my district are both blessed with federal lands. Debates occur all the time about for shooting ranges, and that have been very fierce, as I mentioned earlier. Local land managers have worked with local groups and communities to come up with solutions, including providing access on other federal lands. Unless we see significant closures across the landscape, I think we should allow local managers to make local decisions based on local input. The problem this bill claims to solve does not exist, but this amendment would allow the provisions of the bill to kick in if this problem ever actually developed. I would urge support of my amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, last year the Bureau of Land Management decided that it would close a lot of the land it manages to shooting sports. The agency never explained why it wanted to do this, but one BLM official was quoted in a news article as stating, and I quote, "It's not a safety issue, it's a social conflict issue," end quote. He elaborated by saying that urbanites, and I quote, "freak out," end quote, when they hear shooting. Now, after the public outcry on this, Interior Secretary had to send out an order telling BLM to stand down on this regulation. But the question is really, for how long? There is nothing that prevents the Obama administration from changing its mind, say, immediately after the November election, and again seeking to arbitrarily limit shooting sports. That's why this bill is necessary, to prevent such an arbitrary action by bureaucrats to limit recreational shooting, fishing, and hunting without justification. The amendment by the ranking member of the Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands is even more arbitrary. While the amendment is drafted to appear reasonable, it is most certainly not. The devil is in the clever details. It appears to permit hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting, but in reality the amendment nullifies the actual purpose of the underlying bill to protect these activities. First, one needs to understand that you could fit a lot of eastern states in a small fraction of our land that is BLM land. BLM controls 253 million acres of land, more than 1/8 all the land in the United States. Second, the term public land used in this amendment has an expansive meaning. Legally, public land means more than national forests and BLM land. It also includes the outer continental shelf. So under this amendment, as long as fishing is allowed in any part of the ocean, no actual land need to be open to hunting. In other words, the 20% requirement could be satisfied in the outer continental shelf. Who hunts in the outer continental shelf, Mr. Chairman? Again, the bill we are considering today is about public land open to American people for outdoor recreation. That is a good goal, and this amendment tries to hijack the bill by sending it 180 degrees from the intent of the underlying legislation. So I urge my colleagues to oppose this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The argument that nothing to do with limiting with hunting and shooting has happened yet, but there may be a secret plan to do so after the election. That's preposterous, as it is ridiculous. The problem does not exist, and this bill will do real harm. The example that my good friend the chairman used about urban encroachment and development speaks to the point that we have been trying to make on this legislation, that the greatest threat to hunting and fishing and recreational shooting is exactly that: development, privatization, and unregulated extraction, as we were talking about around the Grand Canyon and uranium mining. Those threats to our public lands are the threats and the trends and the public policy that is being promoted by the majority that will limit and deny access to public lands to hunters, fishermen, and recreational shooters. Right now, as we stand, BLM, 245 million acres, 95% open to those activities. Park Service, 84 million acres, 70% open to those activities. Fish and Wildlife, 150 million acres, 50% open to those activities. Forest Service, 193 million acres, 95% open to those activities. Those activities being hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting. If we want to protect access and protect the opportunities for hunters and fishermen in our public lands, I would urge the approval of the amendment, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Yield myself the balance of the time, which again is how much?
2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My good friend from Arizona said that suggesting in my argument that there could be a change in direction after the November election, and I'll paraphrase, he said that's preposterous. It may be, but I would just remind my colleagues that in a situation here several weeks back when it was not supposed to be recorded, our president was talking to the president of Russia. And he said, and this was recorded on an open mic when he was talking to the president, that, and again, I'll paraphrase, after the election, I'll have more flexibility on missile defense. Now, on that issue, keep in mind, he had already given up the missile defense in Eastern Europe. Why would he want to have more flexibility for the defense of our country? The issue there is flexibility. And the issue is, if the President's going to use flexibility in that context, couldn't you apply the same flexibility to something that he's already done this year that has been reversed? So I don't think it is preposterous. The flexibility issue, I believe, is going to be an issue that's going to be talked a lot between now and November, and it can apply to a great deal of policies that we could be considering in this House. This is one of them, because the administration has already said these activities should make BLM off-limit to target shooting. I don't know why that same principle could not be applied if the President has more flexibility after the election. So I urge defeat of the amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report 112-444. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 4, printed in House Report Number 112-444, offered by Mr. Peters of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 614, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Peters, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
I rise today to support my amendment, which strikes a bailout that was slipped into this bill for 41 wealthy sport hunters who want to import polar bear trophies taken during hunts in Canada. Polar bears were listed as threatened in May of 2008 by the Bush administration's Fish and Wildlife Services, which prohibited their importation as trophies. This protection was not implemented overnight. Trophy hunters were warned. They were warned by federal agencies and hunting associations for more than a year that the final listing would cut off imports immediately. The hunting report told its readers in 2007, and I quote from the hunting report, "The bottom line is no American hunter should be putting hard, non-returnable money down on a polar bear hunt at this time." These individuals knowingly assumed the risk that their trophies might not be approved for importation, and they decided to hunt and to kill these beautiful, threatened creatures anyway. While it's too late to save these bears, passing this bill creates a perverse incentive for trophy hunters who rush to hunt any species as soon that it will soon be protected under the Endangered Species Act, because their friends in Congress will simply bail them out after the fact. We cannot allow that, and that's why I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek recognition?
To oppose the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I strongly oppose this amendment. I'm deeply surprised the gentleman from Michigan would in fact propose the amendment. He has one of these bears from his state, and a lot of hunters are not wealthy. This is a legal activity in Canada. They hunted these bears prior to 2008 and even prior to 2007. These are dead bears, and they're sitting in Canada. When the hunters hunted legally, the Canadian government gave them the proper authority to do so, and it helped the native villages. Right now, there's more bears in Canada than there ever has been in the longest they know in history. Hunting is a vital process of management of game. And these people included 2 wounded veterans. They're in Iraq in that heated area. The one dream they had when they got back was able to go and hunt a polar bear. And I can understand that. They shot their trophies legally with the blessing of the Canadian government in the local province. And then they expected to be able to return those bears, those hides, and yes, even sometimes the body back home for proper display of their hunt. And now to say you can't import something when a bear was declared threatened by, yes, the Bush administration, and wrongfully so. The bears are not threatened. There are more bears now than there was in 1964. I'm probably the only individual that ever shot a polar bear in '64 on this floor, and I'm certainly not rich. I'm suggesting respectfully this amendment is ill-placed, poorly thought out, and improper. I want those people that did things legally by a nation of our neighbors, blessed by the province, to be able to bring those trophies back home as they have the right to do, and yet the act of a Secretary of Interior took it away from them arbitrarily. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Michigan.
I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.